right, hello students. Here we are in Module 12 of our biology lessons, and we're going to be looking once again at botany. Now we've learned all about flowers and things, and if you ask me, I think we're kind of taking a step back now to get some more kind of fundamental understanding of what plants actually are. So why they put flowers in front of this, I have no idea, but we have that out of the way, so now we can go with plants in general. Okay, so our first question, of course, is what is a plant? On the right side over here, you can see a typical plant right there. It looks like a tomato plant, which is awesome. And so we're going to take a look at what defines it. How do we define what a plant is? We kind of know because we talked a little bit last time. You know, we've talked about photosynthesis and that kind of thing. One thing, they belong in the kingdom Plantae. All right, they have multiple cells. There are no single-celled plants out there. Typically, if something's a single cell, it's either going to be in the kingdom Monera or the kingdom Protista, right? So, but in plants, they'll be multicellular. They have more than one cell. They are autotrophic, if you remember what that means. It means they make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. They all are green. All plants are green because they contain chlorophyll. It's part of the definition of being a plant. I will show you eventually one exception. I think I'll show you that next week. Okay, they have cell walls, and the component making those cell walls up is called cellulose. All right, so cellulose is why celery is crunchy. All right, when you take a bite into celery and it goes crunch, especially if it's nice and hydrated, that's because the cell walls have this protein called cellulose. Interestingly, animal cells do not have a cell wall at all. Plant cells do. That's one of the main differences between plant and animal cells. And in some ways, plant cells almost seem more complex, but I don't think that we could say that, because if you look at the complexity of animals and even all the way up to humans, that's pretty significant complexity, right? But meanwhile, with the plants, we have these other specialized tissues, and one of those being cell walls. Okay. In general, we have trouble digesting cellulose, but we can. It just takes some time. That's why a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times we will cook plants to eat them because it helps to break down that cellulose. All right, most of them have roots, stems, leaves, and reproductive organs. Okay, so notice that's most of them. We will see some exceptions to that. All right, well, actually, since most of them, that is the exception. And this study is called botany, okay? So if you know anybody who has a degree in botany, that means they studied plants and got a degree in it. And it's actually fairly fascinating, branch of science. So really fun stuff to look at. Remember, we build everything on plants. Even if you are a carnivore, you don't eat plants, well, the animals that you eat ate the plants. So you are still dependent upon plants. All right, the physiology is the study of the processes in an organism. So physiology is different from anatomy. Anatomy is what does it look like. Physiology is how does it function? What is the function of it? Okay, so the study of the processes of an organism. Plants have vegetative organs that are not a part of the reproduction system, and reproductive organs which are involved in reproduction. Okay, so those are two big words that go on here. So let's take a closer look at that. So the basics are these. Two types of plant organs. The vegetative organs are the parts of the plants that are not involved in reproduction. All right, so we're looking at, the stem, the leaves. Those are not part of reproduction. All right, roots, stems, leaves. All right, and then we have the reproductive organs are the parts that are involved in reproduction. Okay, those would be the flowers, the fruits, and the seeds. Therefore, we're going to come to our definition. Here we go. Anything in the vegetative part is a vegetable. That's where we get the word. And anything that's in the reproductive is a fruit. So we learned last time about the different kinds of fruits, right? And how they're all, separated into their groups and berries, not all berries are actually berries, etc. So if you want to figure out what we're eating, if I'm eating a vegetable or a fruit, answer me this. Did it come from the vegetative part or from the reproductive part? So if I'm eating a zucchini, which some of you might think of as a vegetable, right? Well, it came from the flower. We saw that last week, right? We saw that. So therefore, it's fruit. One of the, easy ways of saying it, if it has seeds in it or on it, it's a fruit. So what would be a vegetable? Think about a root that you might eat, a carrot, a beet, yum. Beets are God's gift to the world. Yummy. Stems. What kind of stems? Celery's a stem. Asparagus is a stem. We eat those, right? Leaves. So you eat all sorts of leaves. If you had a salad, you've eaten a leaf of something, right? Lettuce, that kind of thing. Okay, so those are some botany basics right there. And now let's look at the 4 types of plant tissue. On the right side, you're going to see a little artist rendering of the cross section of a leaf. Okay, we're gonna get into that in very much detail here in just a few minutes. All right, the 4 types of tissue, you probably just need to write these 4 things down. This is the kind of thing that's going to end up on a test or a quiz, okay? The first type is called meristematic tissue. I want you to pay close attention to the word here, stem. All right, you've heard of stem cells? That's what these are. These are plant stem cells. So meristematic tissue, ground tissue, dermal tissue, you might be reminded of skin, right? Dermis, right? And vascular tissue. Now, vascular is going to mean that it has tubes delivering liquids. In the human body, when we talk about the human body is a vascular organism. There are tubes delivering a liquid. The tubes are veins and arteries, and they're delivering blood. So what are these in plants? What are they delivering? The fluid they're delivering is water, and then water with nutrients in a series of tube type things, which we will get to in just a minute. All right, not all plants, by the way, have that. So they're not all vascular plants. All right, so let's take a closer look at meristematic tissue. So like I said, it has to do with stem cells. So undifferentiated cells, they don't have their function yet. They can do many things, okay? They are probably still being, the plant is still deciding what it needs to be. So therefore, that's what the idea of a stem cell is, right? The stem cell is an undifferentiated cell that hasn't been given a duty yet. And so that's what's happened here, right? So we have different types. We have the apical meristem, the lateral meristem, and the intercalary meristem. You can see those in the pictures over here. Okay, we can see what's happening in the stem cells forming a bud. We can see some of the stems. I'm going to get a closer look at our root in just a minute. The apical meristem, all right, and then apical there on our root area. Okay, some of those words are not as important for this course. Just to understand that there is a certain level of complexity in botany that you may not have thought of before, okay? All right, let's take a look at our ground tissue now. We have things called the parenchyma, the collenchyma, the sclerenchyma. They support a variety of functions, okay? So we have, in this particular picture here, which we're going to look at many times, the vascular tissue, notice they're tubes. Remember I told you tubes that are delivering what liquid? Well, water, and then water with nutrients right here. So our ground tissue, you see how it's acting sort of as a support. It's helping to support those little tubes right there. All right, and so we have these fancy words for them, parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma. All of those tend to talk about how the structure is stiff, if you will. I mean, sclera actually means stiff, okay? So it's stiff and it gives the structure, height, if you will, to a plant, that kind of thing. Our dermal tissue, you can see here, right here, dermal tissue, like the skin, right? The outer part here, and then the outer part of this inner part, yeah? Okay? So then we have our ground tissue in there, okay? So, I keep hitting that, I'm so sorry. So the outer covering of plant, that's the definition we'll be using, okay? And now we have the vascular tissue, are the little tubes on the inside. We're going to see it's going to be the transport system within the plant. It's transporting, like I said, water and then nutrient-dense water. And so we're going to see the special names for that. I believe that's in this lecture. Okay, so let's talk about it. Here it is, vascular tissue. This, I think, if you're going to keep one thing about botany in your mind, okay, let it be this. All right, xylem is the non-living vascular tissue that carries water and dissolved minerals from the roots up. It travels up. Okay, that's called xylem. And then we have phloem. That's the living vascular tissue that carries sugar and organic substances throughout a plant. It phloem down, okay? So the water's coming from the roots going up to the plant. Where's the water going? To the leaves. For what purpose? Photosynthesis. Once photosynthesis has done the job of making what it's going to make, that would be the sugars and things, it's going to send that to the rest of the plant by way of the phloem. Now, I always say that the way to remember this is that it phloem down, right? That's how we know it's going from the leaves downward. But it's a little bit of a misconception because the phloem goes both directions, all right, because it's taking the nutrients everywhere. But the xylem only goes up. And so, so if we remember phloem down, then we can remember xylem up, okay? But then keep in mind that the phloem is actually going both ways. I might have a picture of that. Okay, so the previous picture with the round thing showed it pretty well, but you can see it here as well. So notice here we have the xylem. They look like large straws, right? So remember what the definition said. The tissue is actually dead. So that tissue has formed into these nice crunchy like celery straws, right? In fact, if you cut open some celery, you will see the xylem very plainly. I think in your book, I'm not sure if it's for the part 1 or part 2, you take a stalk of celery and make a fresh cut at the bottom of it and put it into a cup with food coloring, and the food coloring will carry up because the just by way of capillary action, it's going to flow up the xylem, and it will actually end up taking that colored water all the way up. And then you can cut it and you can see that xylem and phloem very well. All right, so the phloem is this more compacted area, because remember, these are living tissue right here. If it's living tissue, it's going to need to be a little thinner so that it can get its nutrients delivered to it properly. Okay, whereas the xylem doesn't need any nutrients delivered to it because it's dead, right? It's just a remnant there of that tube, which now functions by way of transpiration and way of capillary action, which we'll cover those terms next week. All right, let's take a little closer look at roots. There are 3 functions of roots. You kind of know these already. Number 1, and most importantly probably, is that it absorbs water and nutrients, okay? Most of the time we'll find roots under the soil, but not always. Sometimes roots will be out of the soil. Also, have you heard of hydroponics? Hydroponics is the science of growing plants in just water. You may know somebody who's done that. You may have known somebody who had a little garden in the house that just had a tank of water and then little plants grew out of it. I can't remember the name of those things. But so it doesn't, as long as we get the proper amount of nutrients, I mean, generally think about it. With photosynthesis, do they really need nutrients? Not so much. But nutrients will make a stronger plant. Just like taking vitamins for you will make you a stronger organism, right? So that's similar with plants, that the nutrients and the minerals that are coming from the soil make a healthier plant. But in general, they can make their own food, right? Just as long as they have sunshine. All right, number 2 is they do anchor the plant. They keep it in place. We don't want our plants traveling around, okay? Our animals can travel around just fine and go find food, but our plants will stay put. And then 3, they're going to store food. They're going to store food for the plant, all right? But sometimes we get to take advantage of that stored food. So let's take a look at our 2 root systems. We have our fibrous roots here that look like you pull it up. This you may recognize when you're having to pull weeds and you pull them up and there's that giant mass of roots down there, right, that tend to sort of stay in the ground. They have a fibrous root system. Then we have the taproot system. Now this right here, does anybody know what that is? I think it's either a turnip. I think it's probably a turnip. It could be, what's that other white one called? But, so another taproot would be like a carrot, right? A carrot has a taproot that goes down. If you've ever had a fresh carrot that's not been already peeled and cut by the grocers or whatever, you'll see all these little root areas down here like this stuck onto it. Parsnip, I think, is the other one. It looks kind of like a white carrot. They're pretty good, actually. I'm not sure how I feel about turnips. As long as you roast them, they're pretty good. I like carrots raw, roasted, anyway, their carrots are just good. All right, let's look now close up. Now, we talked about that different kind of tissue, right? So we're going to see that here. So we're going to start at the bottom. What we're looking at here on the right side of the slide is a microscope, a very thin slice of a root under the microscope, and it's a lateral view. So in other words, we've cut all the way through that root and we're looking at it from the side. It's a pretty cool slide. So for some reason we're starting at the bottom and we call that the root cap. I pointed to it here. Now notice those cells. Look down here. Do you see these cells have a little purple dot in it? Right? What is that purple dot? You remember? That's the nucleus, right? Notice how these don't have any. That's because this tissue, like the outer part of your skin, and it's nice and tough, those are dead, okay? So those are thickened cell walls at the tip right there. That's because it has to push down through, generally like hard soil, right? Soils, if you have a really nice garden that's fluffy soil, and we call that friable soil, that's really nice. The plants like that. They don't have to work so hard. But other plants have to dig down through somewhat, maybe difficult clay-filled, soil. Well, I think we're going to talk more about that kind of soil next week as well. All right, now we're going to get to our meristematic. Remember stem? Meristematic. So look right here. We're going to see that there's constant mitosis. That makes sense, doesn't it? Constant mitosis means those cells are going to be either sent this way or sent this way, because remember, they haven't made up their mind what they're going to be yet. It's what the plant needs at the time. We have our elongation region. So right in here, that's going to keep pushing down and up to get it nice and long. And then our maturation right here. So the cells are fully differentiated. They know what they're going to be, right? And then they're going to move up. So remember, they might develop into xylem and phloem even. So in this case, in the version, if you find it, I'm simplifying it, in the root area. So the cells are fully differentiated. They've started to differentiate here in the elongation area, and then they become fully differentiated. All right, when the root reaches down, you can see the root here. Okay, this is a bean plant, it looks like. Reaches down. Remember, it's going to hit root cap here. It's going to be reaching down to do its job, which is, absorbing water and giving an anchor to it. But I wanted you to see these little things right here called root hairs. Okay, so the root hairs are just this fibrous looking stuff coming off of there that have the capability of absorbing water. So therefore we have a massive increase in surface area, so we could have even more water being absorbed. Very efficient for the plant. Here's a very close-up picture of it. So you see, this is the seed coat and the seed here, and the roots coming out. Look at it, it's already very hairy at the very beginning of that little plant coming to life. It's going to have all those root hairs. All right, here's our cross-section, our lateral view of our root, just like we looked at before. Yeah, and so we saw that region, right? The apical meristem. It's kind of putting it into a region here. It's really right in there, right? Elongation, really right in there. And the maturation, sort of in the middle there. Notice here we have our xylem and phloem right there in the root version of it. Xylem and phloem. Remember, some of those meristem cells could be deciding to become xylem and phloem. When I say deciding, the plant puts those cells where it needs them. All right, so the epidermis here protects the outer surface. Oh, I lost my pointer. There we go. The outer surface right here. Notice that's a root hair, by the way. The cortex stores energy. All right. Cortex in here, so right around here, storing energy. The endodermis. Did I point to that last time? Yeah, epidermis here. Endodermis is, I guess it's pointing all the way in there, isn't it? Epidermis down here, endodermis. Sorry about that. Surrounds the vascular chamber. Vascular chamber, what's in there? The vascular tissue, that's the xylem and the phloem. So here is our vascular chamber, right? That circle, and then that's the endodermis. Here's the epidermis. Oh, I like that picture better. Look, it's easier to see in our cortex. The vascular chamber holds the xylem and phloem right in there. All right. Now this is a microscope view. If you have a microscope and some professionally made slides, I will tell you that plant slides under the microscope look awesome. Now this has been stained, of course. We have to stain them in order to see them. Otherwise it'd just be clear. But notice, I've always thought this was pretty cool. Notice how the xylem kind of makes an X shape, right? X for xylem, not all plants have it that way. Some of them have it actually, the chamber is more scattered. This chamber right here is very compact. That's a certain kind of plant. Some of them, other ones, called monocotyledons, have them kind of dispersed a little more evenly throughout. But we'll get to that. All right, and you can see our phloem. So remember, our xylem is dead. Our phloem is living cells. You can see there it looks like living cells. If we got a little closer, we could see some nuclei having been having been stained in there. We have some meristematic tissue. It might become this or that, right? Endodermis, that's surrounding the whole thing. That's a nice slide right there. All right, so here we're looking at the roots. You can see the little X in here, right? So this is actually bringing us to what I was going to tell you right here. When the xylem and phloem, the vascular bundle's in the middle like that, that is in a group of plants called dicotyledons. Have we talked? Remember we talked about that with the seeds, right? The dicotyledons, and then when it's more scattered around, it's the monocotyledons. Yeah. Here we go. The dicotyledon has the xylem in the X shape, okay? That's this one over here. And then the monocotyledon has them just kind of more dispersed, not quite so organized in the center. All right, stems. We have two main types of stems. We have the herbaceous, herb-like, they're green, and we have the woody, like this. That would be, for instance, a tree. There are three functions of stems. Number one, they support and manufacture the leaves. Okay, so they're supporting, holding, and helping to make the leaves. All right. Two, they carry water and nutrients to and from the leaves. All right, they have their vascular bundles, if they're vascular tissue, that is. And then they do perform photosynthesis when they're green. Okay, so this is green. Now, oftentimes a woody stem may have started from a young plant that had an herbaceous stem that became woody over time. And so if the stem isn't green anymore, it doesn't do photosynthesis. Just the green stems do that. If they're green, they do it. Now this is interesting. Look at this plant. This is a cactus, right? So where is the stem on this? Do you have a guess? The stem is the green part. Isn't that funny? So what are the spines? You know what the spines are? Those are the leaves. That's the leaves of a cactus. It makes sense that the cactus, you know, if it had leaves that were broad, you know, out, they might really wilt pretty quickly in the desert, right? So what they do is they have this type of leaf that doesn't wilt. It's a spine, and then their stem holds a lot of water in it, right? You've heard that. If you cut open a cactus, there'll be a very watery tissue inside. That's true. All right, let's talk about woody stems in the form of trees. All right, so we're looking at a cut piece of a tree trunk right here. Oftentimes, if it's from a branch or even a small trunk, we'll call it a cookie, a tree cookie. And we can look at it. Remember, they're solid all the way through, right? And the phloem is near the bark. This is interesting, right here. You can see the phloem is just inside the bark of a tree. All right, that's going to become important in just a minute here. And the xylem is near the center. Now, so the xylem is in the living part of the tree, and then the xylem is in here. Remember, the xylem is not living. The heartwood in the middle, it's interesting it's called heartwood because it is not alive. It is called the pith, and it's very sturdy and strong, but not a lot of action is happening in there, okay? It's just there for structure. And so then we have our water going up from the roots here and flowing out to here, and all this green part would be considered the living part of the tree trunk. All right, so the living phloem is what we're looking at right there. And the ring of xylem, yeah. Okay, so because the phloem is where it is on a tree, it's important that you not cut around the trunk of a tree all the way around it. We have a little tree it was a very young tree, and one of my sons was out with a weed eater, and he was weed eating around the tree. Well, he ended up cutting the bark on the whole trunk of the tree. And so we really had to work on it to try to, to protect it, because what happens when you do that? It will take away the phloem layer. So fortunately for my little tree, the cut wasn't very deep. We were able to sort of, bandage it up or whatever. We put a wrap around it, and it was able to survive. But this is a way of actually getting rid of some trees if you don't want to cut them down. If you have patience, you have time, you can cut it. We call it girdling, cut it all the way around. I think I have another picture here as well. Yeah, see, it's been girdled right there. And since the phloem cannot get any of the nutrients down, so eventually over time the tree's going to die. Okay, this was a way that the Native Americans tended to fell trees before they had tools. And even think about it, a big tree, that's a lot of work to try to knock that down. So the only thing is, of course, it takes time, like a couple years, right? So you have to be patient. All right, let's take a closer look at leaves. I really like looking at leaves. They, of course, are responsible for the photosynthesis in a plant. There are many shapes and many sizes, but they are all green. They're differentiated by their shape, their arrangement, their margins, something called veination. Those are the veins in there. And each individual species of plant has its own unique leaf. Therefore, botanists can take a look at a leaf and tell you what plant it came from. Most of them can. You know, so for instance, this one here, that I think it's a maple leaf, probably. Looks like maple. All right, so I think you're supposed to go ahead and draw and label this. Just draw just your typical simple leaf. And of course, we know it's going to be green. It comes off of the stem here. Here's the stem. And this little part that comes out is called the stipule and the petiole. Right here, the petiole is that little part there. All of it's known as the axil. And then when you come up here like this midrib, then we have the blade or the lamina, and then the veins, and then the apex. It's not a tough picture to draw. So if you need to pause this to draw that, go right ahead. All right, let's look at venation. We have parallel, pinnate, and palmate are the common venation patterns. Now the leaf behind in this picture right here is clearly a pinnate. It's got lots and lots of veins. Okay, so parallel right here, that makes sense. Okay, you've seen plants like that have parallel leaves. Another plant that has parallel leaves, by the way, this happens to be the way they're arranged in monocotyledons. Corn is one of them like this. Grass, if you look at grass. Here is our pinnate. Look at all of them like a web, right? Like a very intricate there. And then palmate, like the palm of your hand. This is called ginkgo biloba right here, which is a type of a plant with that fancy, very recognizable leaf. This leaf, I have no idea. It could be a million things. I'm not a botanist. We're going to take a closer look. I love this picture. I believe it is a scanning electron micrograph of a cross-section of a leaf. You can see we have the upper part and the lower part, and then the inside we have our vascular bundle right there. We're going to take a look at these. Okay, so we're going to cover this picture in several slides because it's just a great, great picture. All right, we're going to start with the epidermis. It's a single layer of cells right here, pointing to it right there. Right there, that's what that's pointing to on the outside of the leaf, okay? Oops, let me go back one real quick. All right, so it is those living cells right there, very green. All right, so that's the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. All right, now our next thing we're going to look at is called the cuticle. It's a waxy substance over the top, right here, and on the bottom. I will tell you the top cuticle is usually much thicker on the top than on the bottom. It is on the bottom, but the bottom is not as much. Now that is sort of a waterproofing. It keeps the water inside the leaf. Some leaves are waxier than others. You can take a look, for instance, if you have a holly plant, they're very almost glassy on the outside of it. Whereas some plants like the violet we looked at last time is kind of fuzzy. That cuticle's kind of fuzzy. All right, next we're going to look at the stomata. That's right down here. See this? Stoma, the word stoma just means hole. Okay, it means a hole. So there's literally a hole in the lower part of the leaf, not in the upper part, but in the lower part right here. And what that hole is there for is to get the gas exchange. We can see remember the photosynthesis is making oxygen. It's going to send the oxygen out. It's going to bring the carbon dioxide in so that the cells can produce photosynthesis. It can produce their food, okay? So what's next? Our guard cells. I'm going to circle it right here. Right next to the stoma. What they are is that when they thicken with water, by the way, they can get fat and they actually close that hole. All right? To kind of sort of slow things down. To go kind of have a vacation, if you will, for the plant. But if there's not as much water, they open up and we do our photosynthesis. Okay? Sometimes at night they'll close. All right, so here, this is really awesome to see. You can look at the underside of a leaf. In fact, some leaves you can actually look at the underside with a magnifying glass and see some little tiny holes in there. These are the guard cells, and these are the stoma right there. Okay, so guard cell keeping them. This one looks a little open right there. These are the other cells next to it. Exquisite design, lovely. So the stomata of the stoma, the pore, the hole, it's open here, right? It says here mostly on the undersurface. That's true. The guard cells, see when they get really fat, it actually bends. I may have said that the opposite way. It bends so that it opens up, and when they get really floppy, then they close like that, okay? They can change shape to open and close the stoma, the hole, yeah. Here is a scanning electron micrograph of some open stoma with the guard cells nice and plump. All right, I like this. We see the H2O coming out, okay? So remember, water is also made in photosynthesis, right? And so, excuse me, the water's being used in photosynthesis, but the plant also uses the stoma, that's why I put this slide in here, to get rid of excess water. Now, it'll close up if the plant needs the water, just like we saw in this, in this picture here, right? It's going to close up if it needs the water. But if it doesn't, it can get rid of some of the water. Have you ever been standing in the shade of a tree and it's nice and cool under the shade of a tree? Versus if there were a pole barn right next to it, you stood in the shade of a pole barn, it's not as cool under there. That's because essentially the trees are misting on you. Some trees drop big giant drops of water. I think the crepe myrtle, if you've stood under a crepe myrtle, you probably got wet because they drop giant drops of water from you. And so, my son tells me that has some sort of bug action to do that too, insects, interestingly. All right, back to our picture of the side view of the leaf. We're going to look now at the palisade mesophyll. It's an oval-shaped tissue that's tightly packed with chlorophyll cells. Okay, we're going to see it right here. So notice here. So we have our epidermis, right? Notice how packed they are right here. All right, notice they're not as packed down here, right? So what's happening is all these cells right here are packed closely to the top because what are they going to have access to at the top of a leaf? Sunshine. Okay, so this is where the majority of the photosynthesis and the chlorophyll cells are going to take place. This is also why, if you get a chance, it's not a good time of year to go look at leaves because it's, not a lot of our trees have leaves out in February. But even if you get salad at the store, if you have some house plants, look at the top of the leaf versus the bottom of the leaf. The top of the leaf is almost always darker green than the underside of the leaf. And that's because there's more chlorophyll containing cells pressed to the top of the leaf to get access to the sun. Pretty cool. All right, you can see it up here. Look how packed they are right in there. Remember, that's a stained cell. That's probably some xylem and phloem right there. Okay. All right, we're back here. We're to the spongy mesophyll right here. It's looking at this area that doesn't have all the pactin cells. It's got all this right here. It's loosely packed, allowing for space, okay? It says here for gas space. What gases? CO2 and O2 are in there. Now, the next thing, if you have like a spinach leaf or something like that, if you take it and just kind of pay close attention and just squeeze it between your fingers, you'll feel a little squish because you can squish that little air out of it, okay? It's pretty cool. It's spongy. Very cool. All right, here's just another way of looking at it. We have our cuticle, our upper epidermis, our lower epidermis. Here's our palisade mesophyll. Here's our spongy mesophyll down here. Xylem and phloem kind of interspersed in there as our vascular tissue. All right, this is a fun little video just taking us through a leaf. Here we go. You can see those notes on the bottom. Going into the thylakoid. This is where photosynthesis takes place in those pancakes, right? Photosynthesis. I don't know if it makes noise like that. I doubt it. So remember, after photosynthesis, they're going to take that and go make ATP for themselves. All right. So yeah, remember the reason why plants are making the food is it's for themselves to use during when there's no sunshine, right? So they make the ATP that way as well. All right, let's look at leaf arrangements. Okay. Leaf arrangements are also known as the leaf mosaic. I believe your book probably refers to it as leaf mosaic. And there are three main ones: alternate, opposite, and whorled. Now, when springtime comes, take notice of different plants that are coming out with their leaves and try to see if you can tell what kind of mosaic they have. And we're going to be looking at the other parts of leaves too. All right, so here's our mosaics, right? We have, also known as a leaf arrangement, we have alternate. That means on the stem like this, they're coming off like this, not right opposite each other. Opposite, they are opposite each other. And whorled right here, these are fun to look at. What is it? The oleander, I think if you have an oleander, has a whorled leaf. All right, so here's opposite, right? They're right opposite each other. And here's alternate mosaic, right? Not opposite. And then whorled looks like that. In fact, I think that might be the one I was mentioning earlier. Yeah, it might. I don't know for sure. Okay, I don't know that we see them that much. Okay, so a simple leaf is just a leaf coming off its stem with just one leaf coming off the stem. Okay, that's just called a simple leaf. And then compound has like this. Now you're looking at a compound leaf, which is also what? What kind of mosaic? It is opposite, right? Opposite mosaic, compound leaf. All right, now we'll be looking at leaf margins. Now leaf margins are, what do the edges look like? Okay, what do the edges look? See how they're different here? Okay, so we'll look at entire, means mostly smooth. That looks a little bit bumpy there. We have the dentate, means like teeth, so serrate and crenate, they're kind of sharpish, you know, so they're like teeth. That's what dentate means. Undulate, they're like curvier, so these are undulate. So within the dentate we have serrate and crenate. Within the undulate we have lobed and parted. I believe this one and this one are both representative of oak trees. All right, and then we have some more words, you know, because how scientists like to keep labeling things and categorizing things. So entire, mostly smooth. Cerulate, serrate, doubly serrate, dentate, crenate. So these kind of all belong together in the dentate region. And then we have undulate, sinnate, and incised. Not sure where he goes really, but into the lobed, right? Here are some common leaves from plants around. So these are trees. Oak tree, a type of oak tree. Right around here we've got, here in Texas we have, you know, black oaks and live oaks don't look anything like that, right? What do I have here? Post oaks, a lot of post oaks around my property. So oaks, grape leaf, birch, beech, we don't have many of those in Texas, ivy, and maple. Okay, we don't even have that many maples down our way. All right, so here is basically what we're going to do to categorize our leaves. We're going to look at their veins. Okay, you remember these words? It says here net-like. Net-like would be what we call pinnate. Parallel, they don't have palmate on there. Then we have our shapes. This is also called palmate for shape, hand-shaped. Spear-shaped, heart-shaped, round, needle. We have some other more complicated words for some of those. The arrangement would be simple, compound whorled, compound opposite. We could also have compound alternate right over here. There it is, alternate, opposite, whorled. And then our edges. Smooth, remember we called it entire, dentate, lobed. So you see how some people disagree on the ways to label them. Okay, so I wanted to take a look at this one. What shape do you think that one is? It's, you know, you're always going to go out there and find some crazy looking leaves, right, that don't seem to fit into our categories. So I don't know if this is called butterfly shape or what, I'm not sure, but it's very cool. Also, I want to ask you something. What color is this leaf? Well, it's green. You know, it does have purple in it too. Next time we're going to go into all the colors, and they're fascinating right here. The type, this is called the anthocyanin that's in here, the purple color. But notice, look, can you see right here? See the green right there? Yeah, the green. White, where'd it go? There we go. Right there. Okay. So you can see the green on the edges right there as well. So here's what I'm going to tell you. While these are purple looking leaves, they're also green. Okay. The green is sort of being obscured by that beautiful anthocyanin purple color. Okay. So that's all we're talking about for this half of this lab in part 1. So if you do have a microscope, like I said, looking at plant cells, especially professionally made plant slides under the scope, they're very cool looking, very beautiful to look at, especially, you know, the roots and the stems, they're so cool looking. So hopefully you have access to something like that. You know, if not, then use your computer to look up slides of microscope slides of plant parts. Okay. All right. I will see you next time when we get into some of those details about colors and stuff like that. Very good.